Imagine inviting your closest family and friends to a dinner party. Not to celebrate love, but to expose a betrayal so shocking it would shatter every bond in the room. That's exactly what Joe did. For 18 years, he thought he had the perfect marriage, a loyal wife, and a best friend who was like a brother. But when he discovered they were having an affair, he didn't confront them in secret. No, Joe planned a revelation so devastating, so unforgettable, that neither of them could ever escape it. The dining room was alive with laughter, clinking glasses, and the smell of roasted lamb. Family from both sides gathered around the long wooden table, smiling, toasting, sharing stories. But the smiles didn't last, because Joe, standing at the head of the table, raised his glass, not for a toast of love and celebration, but for a revelation that would shatter everyone's world. He slid a small stack of printed photos onto the table. Messages, receipts, hotel bookings. And in those photos, Laura, his wife of 18 years, locked in the arms of Mark, his lifelong best friend. The room went silent. Forks froze mid-air. Faces drained of color. Joe's voice didn't tremble. It was calm, steady, razor sharp. You wanted to know why I gathered everyone here? It wasn't for our anniversary. It was so you could all see the truth. My wife, and my best friend, betraying me behind my back. Gasps echoed around the room. Laura's hand shot out, shaking. Joe, please, it's not what it looks like. Mark stammered. Listen, man, I can explain. But Joe only shook his head, a bitter smile tugging at his lips. No, you can't explain this away. I trusted both of you, and this is how you repaid me. That night would end with broken families, shattered vows, and Joe walking away with his dignity intact, leaving Laura and Mark to drown in the wreckage of their own choices. But this didn't happen overnight. No, it all began months earlier, when Joe first noticed the small cracks in the perfect life he thought he had. Joe had always considered himself a lucky man. He wasn't rich, but he had what mattered. A steady job as a high school teacher, a cozy house, a wife he adored, and a best friend who'd been by his side since childhood. 18 years of marriage to Laura had seen its ups and downs, but Joe always believed they were solid. And Mark? Well, Mark was practically part of the family. He was there for birthdays, holidays, barbecues in the backyard. But lately, something felt off. Laura had grown distant, distracted. She'd spend more time on her phone, smiling at messages she wouldn't share. Mark, too, seemed less available, always busy, when Joe suggested grabbing a drink or watching the game together. One evening, Joe came home early from work. He found Laura in the kitchen, hurriedly locking her phone and shoving it into her purse. Hey, he said softly, kissing her cheek. What's for dinner? She jumped slightly, then forced a smile. Oh, pasta. I was just texting your sister about the weekend. Joe frowned. His sister didn't even own a smartphone. But he said nothing. Later that night, as Laura showered, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Joe glanced at it, just for a moment. A single message lit up the screen. Last night was perfect. Can't wait to see you again. M. Joe's chest tightened. He wanted to throw the phone, scream, demand answers. But something in him shifted. Instead of rage, he felt a cold clarity. This wasn't the moment to confront her. Not yet. He had to be sure. And so, Joe began to watch, to listen, to gather the truth that would one day bring everything crashing down. Joe became a man with two faces. By day, he was the same devoted husband, cracking small jokes at the dinner table, asking Laura about her day, giving her the space she seemed to crave. But inside, a storm brewed. Every little detail that once seemed ordinary now screamed at him. Laura suddenly had Late nights at work. Though she worked as a freelance designer from home, Mark suddenly missed their weekly poker nights, mumbling excuses that never added up. The betrayal was happening in plain sight, but Joe needed more than suspicion. He needed proof. One night, he told Laura he was heading to school to prepare lesson plans. Instead, he parked his car down the street and waited. Hours later, he saw Mark's truck pull into his driveway. The headlights cut across the windows, and then he saw it. Laura, stepping outside, her hair tied back, slipping into the passenger seat. They didn't drive toward town. They drove toward the highway. Joe gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles whitened. His heart pounded, but he forced himself to stay put. Following them now could risk everything. He needed to be smarter. The next morning, over breakfast, Laura hummed to herself, scrolling her phone. "You were gone late last night," she said casually, sipping her coffee. "Yeah," Joe replied, keeping his tone even. "A lot of papers to grade." She nodded, offering a faint smile. "You work too hard." Joe studied her face, the face he had loved for almost 2 decades. It was like looking at a stranger. Later that week, he installed a small tracking app on Laura's phone while she slept. He hated himself for the invasion of privacy. But then he thought of that text message. Last night was perfect. His stomach turned, and his guilt hardened into resolve. 2 days later, the app pinged. Laura's phone was at a hotel on the edge of town. Joe drove there slowly, parking far from the entrance. He watched through the windshield as Laura emerged from the lobby. Her hair was messy, her shirt untucked. A moment later, Mark walked out behind her, adjusting his jacket. They didn't see him. They laughed, touched hands briefly, and walked toward Mark's truck. Joe closed his eyes, swallowing the rage that threatened to spill out. He had seen enough. That night, when Laura crawled into bed beside him, smelling faintly of hotel soap, Joe rolled onto his side, his back to her. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," he answered, his voice flat. In the darkness, his mind raced. He could scream. He could throw her out. He could punch Mark in the face. But no, that would be too easy for them. Instead, he began to plan. A week later, Joe invited Mark out for a drink, pretending everything was fine. They sat at their usual bar, the jukebox humming softly in the background. "To old times," Joe said, clinking glasses. Mark grinned, though his eyes flickered with something nervous. "Yeah, old times." Joe leaned back, pretending to relax. "Hey, our anniversary's coming up next month, 18 years. Thinking of doing something special. You and your wife should come. Make it a group trip. Family, friends, a real celebration." Mark hesitated, just a fraction too long, then forced a smile. "That sounds great, man. She'll love it." Joe sipped his beer, hiding his smirk behind the glass. The trap was already being set. Because this wouldn't be just an anniversary trip. It would be the stage where Laura and Mark's lies came crashing down before everyone they loved. Joe's plan began quietly, like the first notes of a song no one else could hear. Each day, Laura and Mark thought they were outsmarting him, sneaking around like reckless teenagers. But Joe was watching. He tracked their movements, read their messages, and learned their routines. Every secret meeting, every hotel room, every excuse. They were written down in a notebook he kept hidden inside the lining of his desk drawer at school. It wasn't just about catching them. It was about building a story so undeniable, so complete, that when the truth came out, no one would defend them. One night, Laura came home late again. She slipped off her heels, trying not to wake him, but Joe was already awake, staring at the ceiling. "Long night?" he asked softly. Laura froze, her back turned. "Yeah, client revisions. They're picky." Joe rolled over, meeting her eyes in the dark. "You're amazing, you know that? I don't know how you juggle it all." She gave a small smile, guilty, maybe, or just tired, and kissed his cheek. Thanks, honey. He watched her fall asleep, her breathing slow and steady. She thought she was safe. She thought her lies were airtight. But Joe was already 3 steps ahead. He started planting seeds. At a neighborhood barbecue, he casually mentioned to Mark's wife, Emily, how hard Mark had been working lately. You must miss him, Joe said gently, sipping his drink. Emily frowned. Working late? He hasn't said much about that. Joe shrugged innocently. Maybe I misunderstood. He's always tired when I see him. I just assumed. The doubt took root. He saw it in Emily's eyes. Meanwhile, Joe began recording. He bought a small camera, disguised as a picture frame, and set it in their living room. Another, hidden in the garage where Laura often stepped out to take calls. He didn't need hours of footage, just a few minutes here and there to show the truth. And the truth came. One rainy afternoon, Laura sat in the garage, whispering into her phone. Joe, in the kitchen, pretended to cook. All that, I can't wait to see you tonight, she said softly, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. He has no idea. It's almost too easy. Joe stirred the sauce slowly, his jaw tight, while the hidden camera captured every word. That night, he transferred the recording to a private hard drive, another piece of the puzzle. Days later, Joe intercepted another message. Mark, hotel, 7 p.m., room 214, same as before. P. Joe smiled grimly. Perfect. He called in a favor from an old friend who worked at the hotel. That evening, instead of grading papers, he slipped into room 212, the one right next door. Through the thin walls, he heard everything. The laughter, the murmurs, the lies spoken between kisses. He recorded the audio, every sickening second of it. And when Laura came home that night, slipping into bed smelling of perfume that wasn't hers, Joe whispered into the dark, "Sleep well." His plan was nearly complete. But he wasn't going to confront her yet. No, he was going to make sure when the truth exploded, there would be no escape, no excuses, no way to hide. The anniversary trip was already booked. The guest list was set. Friends, family, even Emily, Mark's wife, would be there. Joe was preparing not just revenge. He was preparing a stage. And when the curtain lifted, Laura and Mark would find themselves trapped in a play of their own making. The anniversary trip arrived like a celebration of love. At least, that's what Laura thought. Joe had rented a lakeside cabin big enough for close family and a few friends. Laura beamed as they drove up, holding his hand, as if she were still the doting wife. Joe smiled back, the perfect husband, hiding the storm behind his calm eyes. Inside, the air smelled of pine and wood smoke. His sister, a few old friends, and even Emily, Mark's wife, were already there. The weekend was meant to be filled with laughter, memories, and champagne. Laura floated around the room, laughing with everyone, pouring drinks, playing the role of loyal wife without missing a beat. But Joe watched, always watching. That evening, as the group sat around the fire pit, Emily leaned toward Joe. Her voice was low, almost a whisper. Joe, has Laura seemed different lately? Joe raised an eyebrow. What do you mean? She just seems distracted. Mark, too. He's been distant. Emily hesitated, chewing her lip. Sometimes I think, no, it's probably nothing. Joe set down his glass. It's never nothing, Emily. Their eyes locked for a moment, and she seemed unsettled by the certainty in his voice. Later that night, Laura slipped out of the cabin, phone in hand. Joe followed silently, keeping his distance. She was giggling softly, whispering into the receiver, I wish you were here. This would be perfect. A pause, and then she said, Tomorrow, after the hike, I'll find a way. Joe's stomach tightened. She couldn't help herself. Even during their anniversary, even with family all around, she was still planning a secret meeting. The next morning, Joe suggested the hike himself. The whole group came along, weaving through pine trails and rocky climbs. Laura stayed close to Joe, smiling for photos, holding his arm, while secretly sending texts when she thought no one was looking. But Joe saw. He always saw. By midday, the group stopped for lunch near a lookout. Joe had been waiting for this moment. He pulled out his phone, connected it to the small Bluetooth speaker he'd tucked into his backpack, and pressed play. At first, the sound blended with the wind. A soft laugh. A whisper. Then the words became clear. I can't wait to see you tonight. He has no idea. It's almost too easy. Everyone froze. Lauren's smile vanished. Her face drained of color, as her own voice echoed through the trees. Emily's head whipped toward her husband, Mark. What was that? She demanded, her voice trembling. Laura stammered. That's not... Joe, what is this? Joe didn't answer. He simply played the next clip. Muffled laughter, murmurs through hotel walls, Mark's voice whispering her name. Emily gasped as though she'd been struck. She stood up, shaking, her eyes blazing at Mark. You bastard. Mark tried to grab her hand, but she yanked away, sobbing. Laura turned on Joe, desperate. "You set me up. You've been spying on me? How could you?" Joe stood calmly, his voice steady, but cutting. "How could I? No, Laura, how could you? On our anniversary trip, with our friends, with our family. 18 years together, and this is what you do." Silence. Everyone stared at Laura and Mark. Their betrayal laid bare in the open air. Emily was crying. Joe's sister shook her head in disgust, and Laura stood trembling, her mouth opening and closing, with no defense to offer. Joe finally put the speaker away. "You wanted to play games behind my back. Now everyone knows the truth." Laura whispered, "Please, Joe, let's talk about this privately." But Joe shook his head. "No more secrets. Not anymore." And with that, he turned and began walking back toward the cabin, leaving Laura behind in front of the people whose respect she'd just lost. The trap had been sprung, but Joe wasn't finished. This was only the beginning of her fall. Back at the cabin, the mood had shifted. What was supposed to be a weekend of celebration now hung thick with tension. Emily sat on the couch, crying into her hands, while Mark paced uselessly, muttering excuses. Laura trailed after Joe, begging him to listen, her voice cracking with desperation. "Joe, please, it was a mistake. It didn't mean anything. I was lonely. I was stupid." Joe stopped in the middle of the living room. Slowly, he turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "A mistake is forgetting an anniversary. A mistake is saying something you don't mean in anger. Sneaking around for months with my friend? Lying to my face every day? That's not a mistake, Laura. That's who you are." Her eyes brimmed with tears. She reached for him, but he stepped back. From the corner, Emily's voice cut through. "Don't you dare pretend it was just a mistake, Laura. I trusted you. You sat in my house, you hugged me, you asked about my kids, while you were destroying my marriage." But Emily slapped him hard across the face. The crack echoed through the cabin. "You disgust me," she spat. "Both of you." Joe let the silence hang before walking to the side table. He pulled out a folder he had packed earlier. Laura blinked as he dropped it onto the coffee table in front of her. "What's this?" she whispered. "Divorce papers," Joe said calmly. "Already drafted, already signed by me. All that's left is your signature." She looked at him in horror. You planned this." "I planned for the truth to come out. And now it has. Everything you've been enjoying. The house, the savings, the business I built from the ground up. You lose your hold on it today." Laura's knees buckled, and she sank into the chair, shaking her head. "No, Joe, please. I can't survive without you." Joe's voice was cold, final. "You should have thought about that before you decided to betray me with the man sitting right here." Mark opened his mouth, but Joe cut him off. "And as for you, Mark, you're finished. Emily will handle you. You've lost her trust, and mine is gone forever. I don't want to see you again after tonight." Mark glanced at Emily, but the hatred in her eyes made him flinch. Laura buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. "I made a mistake, Joe. Don't throw everything away over this." But Joe didn't flinch. He leaned down, speaking so quietly that only she could hear. "You threw it away the moment You chose him. Later that night, Joe packed his bags and left the cabin. He didn't look back. Behind him, the sounds of Laura's sobs and Emily's rage echoed through the walls. But Joe felt no sympathy, only release. In the weeks that followed, the divorce became public knowledge. The papers went through smoothly. Joe had already lined up every detail. Laura was left with next to nothing. No house, no savings, no access to the life she'd grown so comfortable in. Her name became a whispered scandal among their friends and neighbors. Mark fared no better. Emily kicked him out and filed for her own divorce. He found himself living in a shabby apartment, abandoned by the circle that once respected him. Joe, meanwhile, found peace. He went back to his classroom, his students becoming a source of joy again. For the first time in years, he felt light, free. And on a quiet Saturday afternoon, he sat on his porch, sipping coffee, watching the sun dip behind the trees. He thought about what he'd lost. Then he thought about what he'd gained. He hadn't just exposed their betrayal. He had taken back his dignity, his freedom, his life. Sometimes, revenge isn't about destroying the other person. Sometimes, it's about showing them they never had power over you in the first place. And Laura, once so smug, once so careless, was left with nothing but the memory of the man she had underestimated. The man who outsmarted her. The man she could never break. Joe.